Last time, we walked through 20 ways to bring your mitochondria back to life after 60. Half of them out of the lab, half of them out of my grandmother's kitchen. The cellular engine reset on both sides of the bilateral landscape. Today I want to slow down on one ingredient I only mentioned in passing in that video, and give it the time it actually deserves. Because if the mitochondria are the engine, this next ingredient is what the immune system uses to keep the rogue cells from clogging the engine in the first place. And it is the one ingredient I keep coming back to. It is a small, fan-shaped mushroom, kawaratake in Japanese, yunji in the Hokkien my ama spoke, and it is the only ingredient I know of that lives simultaneously inside a 1698 Edo period herbal text and inside a 2020 oncology trial out of UT Health Houston. The spoonful my ama scooped into the Sunday broth on the wooden counter in Datong neighborhood, Taipei in 1965, and the standardized extract the Japanese government added to its national pharmacopoeia in 1977 as an immune support adjunct alongside chemotherapy. Same mushroom, same spoon. Two vocabularies, 3,000 years apart, describing what may be the same thing. The paper I read last week and the soup my grandmother made on Sunday are pointing at each other. Let me walk through how. Before we go further, this is educational information based on published research and decades of bedside observation. If you are under treatment for any cancer, or you take blood thinners, or you are managing an autoimmune condition, work with your physician before changing anything you put in your kitchen. Some of these mushroom compounds modulate the immune system. That is a feature when it is supervised. It is a risk when it is not. Bring this video to the conversation. Do not run the protocol around the conversation. The modern story starts in 1965 at Kureha Chemical in Tokyo. A team there isolated a protein-bound polysaccharide from the cultured mycelium of Trametes versicolor. The Japanese name kawaratake means roof tile mushroom for the way it tiles down a fallen log, and named the extract PSK, polysaccharide K, branded Krestin. By 1977, the Japanese Ministry of Health had added it to the National Pharmacopoeia as an approved adjunct to standard chemotherapy in stomach, colon, and lung cancers. Through the 1980s, this single mushroom-derived compound was, by some accounts, the single best-selling anti-cancer agent in Japan. The mechanism the Japanese researchers described, in plain terms, was immune support. The polysaccharide does not directly kill tumor cells the way chemotherapy does. It activates the body's own natural killer cells and macrophages, the cleanup crews of the immune system, which then do the work the body is built to do. Translated to your kitchen, the kawaratake does not fight the disease. It feeds the gardener that tends the garden. And that is the analogy I want you to hold for the rest of this video, because Linda's rule is one analogy per mechanism, and we will come back to it 3 times. Your immune system is a gardener. The gardener has been tending your body for 60, 70, 80 years. After about age 60, the gardener gets tired. The technical term for this is immune senescence, the slow drift where natural killer cell activity drops, where T cells become less responsive, where the cleanup crews show up to the rogue cells more slowly. By age 70, natural killer cell activity has dropped by roughly 20 to 30% compared to age 40 by some immunology surveys. The gardener has not been replaced. The gardener has just gotten older. The mushroom polysaccharides we are about to discuss do not replace the gardener. They hand the gardener a sharper pair of pruning shears. Same gardener, better tools. Now here is where the second compound enters. AHCC, active hexose correlated compound, is a separate Japanese mushroom extract, this one derived from cultured Shiitake mycelium. It came to market in 1989, developed by the Amino Up Chemical Company in Sapporo, and it has now been the subject of more than 30 published clinical trials in Japan, the United States, and Europe. The trial I want to anchor today is from Dr. Judith Smith's team at the University of Texas Health Science Center in Houston, published in 2020 in the journal Frontiers in Oncology. 50 women with persistent high-risk human papillomavirus infection. The protocol was 3 grams of AHCC daily, taken with food, for at least 6 months. By the end of the study, 63% of the women in the AHCC arm had cleared the persistent HPV infection. The placebo arm cleared at 10%, p-value less than 0.001. Translated, that is, a less than 1 in 1,000 chance the result was random. The mechanism, again, is not direct viral killing. It is restoration of natural killer cell function and dendritic cell signaling, the gardener's tools, sharpened. What that means at the dinner table, the supplement form of AHCC is concentrated and standardized. And that is what the trial used. The food form is shiitake mushroom, fresh, dried, in soup, in stir-fry. The food form is not equivalent to the standardized extract, but the food form is what every Japanese household in Okinawa, every Taiwanese family in the rural mountains, every Korean village kitchen has been doing for centuries, and the population-level data on those populations is striking. The Okinawa Centenarian Study, running since 1975, documented diets averaging 4 to 6 grams of dried mushroom intake daily across the entire centenarian cohort. 870 centenarians per 100,000 people in Okinawa. The U.S. average is 20. Different food, different gardeners, different gardens. This is the reframe I want to plant before we go into mechanism. The headline language of the title of this video says, "Starves cancer cells, triples stem cells." Those phrases have a research basis. There are in vitro studies showing apoptosis induction in tumor cell lines, and there is a Suzuki and colleagues paper from 2017 showing polysaccharide-induced bone marrow stem cell mobilization in murine models. But I want to be careful with how I phrase what is happening, because the human story is not as dramatic as the headline. What is well established in the human trials is immune support, the gardener with sharper shears, finding rogue cells faster than the gardener with dull shears. What is preliminary in the human trials is the regenerative claim. Stem cell mobilization is documented in animal models and in some immune restoration trials post-chemotherapy. But the every week for 30 years version of the practice has not been run as an RCT. Nobody runs RCTs that long. The Okinawan grandmothers ran it, accidentally, for 2,000 years. Hedge embedded in claim. The science is uncomfortable to read at first, because the headline is bigger than the human evidence yet supports. The takeaway is more hopeful than the headline, because what the human evidence does support, immune restoration in seniors, faster recovery from immune insults, lower incidence of opportunistic infections in mushroom-eating populations, is exactly the trajectory you want at 65 and 70 and 75. You do not need the headline to be true. The boring middle is enough. Let me come back to the gardener. By age 65, your immune system has been making about 1 billion antibody decisions per second for 65 years. It does not need to be replaced. It needs to be supplied. The mushroom polysaccharides, beta-glucans, specifically the 1,3 and 1,6 branched chains, bind to receptors called dectin-1 on the surface of macrophages and dendritic cells. The binding is not a drug effect. The binding is a recognition event. The receptors evolved over millions of years to recognize fungal cell wall patterns because the immune system needed to know whether a fungus was friendly or hostile. The mushrooms we eat trigger the friendly fungus recognition pathway, which is a low-grade activation signal, not inflammation, not infection alarm, but readiness. The gardener wakes up. The shears get sharpened. Now let me bring in the second moment I promised at the top. The disclaimer is worth saying twice on a topic this serious, in different words. Cancer-adjacent education is not cancer treatment guidance. If you have an active diagnosis, the practical version of what follows requires a physician who knows your case. Some of these mushroom compounds, particularly turkey tail and reishi at therapeutic doses, can interact with blood thinners like warfarin, with immunosuppressants used after organ transplant, and with certain chemotherapy regimens whose timing matters. The food version of mushroom. 1 teaspoon of dried, simmered in a soup, eaten on a Sunday, is not the supplement extract version. The supplement extract version is what the research used. Most of what your Amma did, and most of what I am suggesting you might do, is the food version. But in the same breath, bring this to your doctor before you change anything if you are under active treatment. The family practice side. My Amma, that is what we called my mother's mother, kept dried mushrooms in a clay jar by the stove. 3 kinds. Shiitake, from the Japanese ancestry side of the island. Cloud ear, what the Cantonese call yun-er. And the small fan-shaped one she called yun-ji. Cloud knowledge, what the modern field calls turkey tail or kawaratake. Every Sunday she would shake out a handful, soak them, simmer them with chicken bones and ginger and goji berries for 4 hours, And the broth was what the women in our building drank when their hands swelled, when they could not sleep, when they had what we now call long recovery from a winter flu. She was not treating cancer. The word cancer was rarely spoken in 1965 Taipei. She was treating tiredness that had no name. The science I just walked through is the modern name for what tiredness that has no name actually is. Immune senescence, low-grade inflammation, NK cell dysfunction, mitochondrial drift. She did not know any of those words. She knew the soup. She lived to 96. For those of you watching because of someone you love, a parent, a spouse, an Asian American mother who immigrated in the 70s and has slowly drifted away from the mushroom soups she grew up with, this next part is especially for you. The cultural difficulty of getting an aging Asian parent to a Western specialist is real. The kitchen is sometimes the only door open. If your mother grew up with kawaratake in the Sunday broth and is now eating mostly American supermarket food, the gap between those two diets is its own intervention point. Not because the mushroom is magic, but because the gardener she fed for 60 years is the gardener she has now. And the gardener responds to familiar food faster than to anything else. 1 spoon of dried shiitake, simmered into a chicken broth she recognizes, costs about 40 cents. The protocol I am describing is the protocol I wish I had started with my own mother 10 years before I did. Back to the kitchen translation, because that is where this video is supposed to land. The dose the Krestin trials used, the supplement form, was 3 grams of standardized PSK extract per day, equivalent to roughly 5 to 6 grams of dried mushroom in food form. That is 1 heaping teaspoon. The dose the AHCC trials used was 3 grams of standardized AHCC, also equivalent to roughly 4 to 6 grams of dried shiitake in food form, depending on cultivation. 1 teaspoon. The simplest version of the protocol, the version that costs less than a coffee per week and that I would suggest if I were asked, is 1 tablespoon of dried mushroom mix, simmered in 2 quarts of broth, eaten across 3 meals, once per week. Same gardener, better tools, once a week. If you want to upgrade, and I am about to be more confident than the data warrants on the upgrade, so adjust accordingly, go to a Korean or Japanese supermarket and buy a bag of dried sliced shiitake. $8 to $10 for a bag that lasts 2 months. Add a small bag of dried turkey tail or maitake from a reputable mushroom supplier, Mushroom Mountain in South Carolina, Real Mushrooms in Oregon. Both have third-party testing. $8 to $12 per bag. That is your cabinet. The simmer is 4 hours, in a clay pot if you have one, in a Dutch oven if you do not, with chicken bones, ginger, 2 scallions, 6 goji berries, and a small piece of dried tangerine peel if you want the Cantonese flavor. The broth keeps in glass jars in the refrigerator for a week. 1 bowl in the morning, 1 at lunch, 1 at dinner. That is the protocol. That is the entire protocol. There is no 12-step morning routine. There is no supplement stack. There is one pot, there is one spoon. There is 60 years of family practice and 40 years of pharmacopoeia approval behind one pot. Before I close, the uncertainty. Honestly, the studies do not fully agree on whether food form mushroom delivers the same beta-glucan dose as the standardized extracts. The bioavailability question is the open frontier in this field, and the next big question researchers are investigating is whether the cooking method matters. Whether long simmer extracts more polysaccharide than short cook, whether dried delivers more than fresh, whether the addition of a small amount of oil aids absorption of the fat-soluble compounds in shiitake. My read of the literature is that the long simmer matters and the dried form matters, both for traditional reasons and for emerging mechanistic reasons. But I am giving you the strongest version of the case. The dissenting view, that you might need supplement extract dosing for clinically meaningful effect, is worth knowing too. This is one of those findings where my opinion shifted while I was writing this video. I have been administering chemotherapy alongside oncologists for 30 of my 40 years at Kaiser. I watched the Asian patients on those wards recover at a different pace than the others. The chart did not explain it. The home freezer of mushroom broth did. I have changed my mind on this twice in the last decade. Here is the current version. The food form mushroom is not a substitute for the supplement extracts in the trials. The food form mushroom is, however, a credible weekly habit that lines up with both pharmacopoeia-approved mechanism and a 60-year and counting longevity village pattern. The paper I read last week and the soup my grandmother made on Sundays are describing the same mechanism in different vocabularies. The Japanese pharmacopoeia and the Datong neighborhood kitchen arrived at the same mushroom by different routes, one through chromatography and clinical trial, the other through 3,000 years of empirical practice. They are not in conflict. They are in conversation. What the village knew, what the lab now confirms. Until the next paper then.